Thank you, Megan, for that very kind welcome. I hope everyone enjoyed their L'Arche lasagna. Lasagna was made by the L'Arche community of Boston, or North Boston. So hope you enjoyed that. My name is Russ Petras, and I'm Executive Director of Future Church, which sponsors the Catholic Women Preach project. I'm blessed to be here with my friend and colleague, Betty Ann Donnelly, who is also co-editor on this volume and the series of books. On behalf of both of us and everyone involved with Catholic Women Preach, welcome and thank you so much for being with us this evening. We are extremely grateful to the Boston College Clough School of Theology and Ministry for your warm welcome and your hospitality. We especially thank Kara O'Sullivan, and she's doing something important. Kara O'Sullivan, Megan DeDios, and James Burstyn for all of their help in bringing this event together. And thank you to everyone who played a role in that prayer service. It was beautiful. Thank you, Julia, for presiding, and Sister Anna for your wonderful preaching, and Krista for your inspired reading. Thank you. And finally, I want to give a special shout out to Olivia Hasty, who's wearing two hats tonight. She's both a PhD student here at BC and a staff member of Future Church. Thank you, Olivia, for everything you did to bring us together tonight, from coordinating the prayer service, to ordering the food from L'Arche, to working behind the scenes with Megan and Kara. You are a rock star. Thank you. Having attended Weston Jesuit and graduated from Boston College, it's a particular joy to be here in Boston to celebrate the launch of this book. The people, the women of Boston College have been extraordinarily generous with their talents and their voices and their wisdom in contributing to Catholic Women Preach. We've had the honor of inviting dozens of women who have connections to Boston and to Boston College to preach on our website. And of the 62 contributors to this particular volume, no less than 13 have BC connections.
Tonight we have a wonderful celebration planned for you. But before we begin, there are a few additional people we absolutely must thank. First, we want to thank the members of the Catholic Women Preach Founding Committee. In addition to Russ and me, CSTM grad Jocelyn Collin is here. Yes. Woo-hoo! Sister Diana Culbertson, Rita Houlihan, and Deborah Rose. Their vision, passion, and hours of planning brought the idea of Catholic Women Preach into reality in Advent of 2016. I also want to thank the distinguished members of our advisory board, whose wise counsel and support have helped us immensely every step along the journey. They include Professor Emerita M. Sean Copeland, Professors Tom Groom, who couldn't be here due to illness, and Jim Keenan. I used to be a Eucharistic minister at the Mass where Jim and John preside. CSTM grad Rhonda Miska, former CSTM faculty member Nancy Pineda Madrid, and while he was still with us, Rick Gaillardi. We're deeply grateful to Robert Ellsberg and the entire fabulous team at Orbis Books. We are honored to be working with a publishing house especially known for its commitment to social justice and lifting up the perspectives of the marginalized. We would also like to thank CSTM grad Kelly Sankowski. I don't know where Russ and I would be without Kelly. As editorial assistant to all 3 volumes, Kelly communicated with each of the contributors we selected, proposed titles for the reflections, and compiled all of the edits and changes to the texts and updates to their bios. It was a monumental task, which Kelly made look easy. Then, of course, there are the 62 contributors themselves to this volume. Catholic Women Preach would not exist without the extraordinary, faith-filled, insightful women whose wisdom and witness have helped us make sense of our lived realities and more tenaciously follow the path of discipleship in today's fraught world. Finally, I want to thank those who have accepted the invitation to be part of tonight's program. Let's introduce our distinguished panel, each of whom is among the 416 women who have contributed 510 inspiring and challenging reflections, all still fully accessible on our website. Sister Margaret Guider is Associate Professor of Missiology at the Clough School of Theology and Ministry. Meg is former president of the Association of Professors of Mission, as well as the American Society of Missiology, and has served as an advisor or board member for religious institutes and missionary societies, as well as Catholic institutions and faith-based organizations. And she is also a dear, beloved, longtime friend. Tonight, she will be speaking with us about women preachers and the mission of the church. Thanks, Meg. Are we going to start? Let's go ahead or introduce everybody. Okay. Introduce the whole thing.
Sister Colleen Gibson is a sister of St. Joseph, currently serving as coordinator of pastoral care at St. John, St. Paul Catholic Collaborative in Wellesley. A graduate of the Clough School of Theology and Ministry, she is also co-host of the wonderful podcast Beyond the Habit, which aims to move us beyond everyday assumptions about what it means to be Catholic. Tonight, Sister Colleen will discuss the role of women's preaching in parish and virtual settings.
Kayla August is a doctoral student at the Clough School of Theology and Ministry, where she is exploring the intersection of preaching and religious education. As a Black Catholic laywoman and an incredibly gifted preacher, Kayla makes it a point to preach whenever and wherever she can, even in non-traditional spaces. Tonight, Kayla will be talking about the vocation of a preacher.
I keep waiting for one of the panelists to say, actually, that's not what I'm talking about. And finally, we welcome Chanelle Robison, who is a doctoral candidate in systematic theology she's a PhD. She has, I'm sorry, this is an old version. She has her PhD in systematic theology from Boston College. She also has her STL from Boston College. Her scholarship explores decolonial and womanist approaches to theological anthropology. Chanelle is the recipient of doctoral fellowships through the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and the Louisville Institute. Tonight, Chanelle will offer some theological reflections on women's preaching. Thank you, Chanelle.
Thanks to the whole panel.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I will try and get this party started. So, preaching and the mission of the church. When we think about preaching, I imagine a variety of ways in which preaching unfolds. Proclamation, instruction, consolation, exhortation, condemnation, denunciation, interpretation, and perhaps most importantly, encouragement. We know something about Mary Magdalene, who's lifted up as someone who takes the word forward. But there are other perspectives from history that we may turn to, such as the Desert Mothers, some of whom were known for their preaching. We have, of course, Hildegard of Bingen. Her significance as not only a German abbess, but also a preacher, a composer, many other qualities that she had, but she somehow made a way where there hadn't been a way before, and it was through her preaching that many people, in addition to her own sisters, were informed and influenced. She may be considered one of the first major woman influencers in the church. And then, of course, Catherine of Siena. One of what has been described as one of the most intriguing and explosive saints in church history. I highlight these women because they were acknowledged as preachers. And I think they serve as important points of reference for us as we think about charism. From the Desert Mothers to Hildegard, we're reminded of the monastic tradition of preaching as part of a charism. From the mendicants, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Carmelites, the Servites, there was something about the mendicant charism that also carried with it the vocation to preach. And then we have the apostolics, the missionaries, whose work in preaching was often in partnership, because often, truth be told, a little hint about mission, women missionaries often happen to be better linguists than some of their male counterparts. And part of that was because they were closer in many ways to the people, especially to the women and to the children. Now there's that old saying, I'm not sure Francis of Assisi ever said this, preach always and everywhere, and if necessary, use your words. Well, I think it's important for us to look to the right and to the left as we are talking about Catholic women preaching, not to lose sight of our Protestant, Orthodox, and Pentecostal, our non-ordained sisters and brothers who are preaching today and have preached before. Within the context of the United States, I'd just like to quickly observe that our embeddedness in parish structures, I think, has heightened our consciousness with regard to the prohibition to offer homilies within the context of Eucharistic celebrations. It is more acute, I think, for us as Catholics. The fact that it's a ministry reserved to the ordained within the context of Eucharistic liturgies, it's still important for us to remember that with courage and creativity and collaboration in the ministry of preaching, ways have been found, Catholic women preach for one, and adaptations have been made, and one could say that we find our way into exceptions to the rule of canons, I think it's 766 and 767. Historically, arguments have increased not only because of charismatic gifts, but also theological formation that in some cases, in the case of both laymen and lay women, exceeds those of the ordained. Academic authorization, however, does not trump episcopal authorization, as we well know. Definitely a source of frustration and consternation for Catholic lay preachers, women and men alike. However, it's important to recognize how often in situations of ultimacy, the rules are bended. this happens across the board, I think, in terms of ecclesial ministry. I'd highlight, for example, baptisms where there are no priests or deacons, and the rite of baptism is followed, which includes preaching. Funerals. Let me tell you how this has been bended in the context of women religious for several years. In the context of our celebrations of life, of our sisters that go home to God, I think few are the presiders that say, I really want to do this homily. More often than not, they welcome the charismatic gift of sisters willing to preach in memory of a treasured and beloved sister. But I think it's also important to recognize that our opportunities for liturgical preaching, perhaps we have not been creative enough within the context of Eucharistic liturgies. And that creativity requires partnership with those who are presiding. We must continue to take hold of opportunities that are available to us, introducing the readings for the day, reflecting subsequent to the whole experience of the liturgy. But as we know, there's a price to be paid for any kind of preaching, especially prophetic preaching, as Bishop Marion Buddy demonstrated for us last week. Are we willing, able, and courageous enough to pay that price? Christian witness is always a form of preaching in the reality in which we find ourselves. The opportunities available to us may be unlimited if we can work in partnership. So the questions quickly to raise: will ordained make a space for something more to help the faithful create a desire to hear lay voices, especially those of women? But this is a question: do women want to listen to women? So when we think of Canon 766 and 767 from the 1983 Code of Canon Law, bishop's discretion, bishops can allow lay people to preach in their diocese, but not during the homily. But we have Eucharistic liturgies that last a good hour. Isn't there somewhere in there to create the opportunity for such reflection? There's reasons for allowing shortage of clergy, layperson has a particular expertise or experience, language requirements at time. But the U.S. bishops in 2001, under the leadership of now Cardinal Wilton Gregory, issued a complementary norm. It did not allow women to preach, but that was just during the time of the homily. So we need to understand that as we move forward on questions of collaboration between clergy and laity, where are the creative spaces? And in partnership, ordained and lay, are we willing to create those spaces? Because it's an incredible opportunity that is unlimited. Thank you.
Well, I will pick up right where Meg left off, speaking about the parish and virtual ministry, the podcast. So I want to begin with a story. When I began my ministry at St. John St. Paul Collaborative out in Wellesley, one of my sisters in Philadelphia sent me a card to welcome me to my new ministry. She had served for many years in pastoral ministry, and she had some advice for me. She told me that I would be as much a blessing to the parish as the parish would be to me. She also said I should take every day off that I got. Yep. But what spoke to me most was the front of the card that she sent. And on it, it said, hold on to your realness. Trust your own voice. Believe in the difference you make. I hung that card on the bulletin board in front of my desk the day that I got it, and it has not moved since. It has overseen the writing of many reflections, including those for Catholic Women Preach. It has encouraged me as I sat with parishioners and helped them to see how God was speaking in their lives and to help them to give voice to God's truth as it's speaking within them. And it has been the guide for a better part of 4 out of 6 seasons of the podcast Beyond the Habit that I host with another sister of St. Joseph that have been recorded right there in my office. Hold on to your realness. Trust your own voice. Believe in the difference you make. As I was reflecting on this wonderful volume for today and the role of preaching in the context of the parish and the podcast, those words came back to me again. As Sister Meg just so aptly laid out, women's preaching has always been around, has always been present, and there are so many opportunities for collaboration and for the emergence of women's voices in new and wonderful ways. We have to think outside of the boundaries that we place on ourselves. Although at times I feel like women's preaching can feel like a foreign concept to people. It can be relegated to alternate spaces, and by its very existence, it seems to push boundaries. When a woman preaches in the parish, people notice. Sometimes people are very complimentary. Sometimes people are not. And when I think about the parish context, with rare exceptions, as Sister pointed out, save for missionary appeals or children's liturgies, we don't hear women within the context of the Mass. As somebody who, by virtue of my role in the parish, attends no less than 5 liturgies on a weekend, I can attest to the fact that while in most cases there is good preaching, it would be elevated by the voices of women. Catholic Women Preach aims to do that in one way. It provides a wonderful resource to our clergy and those who are preaching in that homily spot in the liturgy. I know priests, our pastor included, who use Catholic Women Preach to prepare for the liturgy. But there's a difference between drawing from diverse sources and letting those sources and preachers speak for themselves in their own voice. And I know this because I've seen an overwhelming response to people hearing women's voices within the parish. There is a hunger for women's voices and perspectives. And within our own collaborative, we make space available so that that hunger can be fed and people can live out their call to be preachers, that women can live that out. From preaching that happens in grief groups on a weekly basis, those who accompany those who are grieving are preaching and doing theological reflection, to St. Phoebe Day prayer services where we hear preaching. We offer that space because it's important. It's important to our community. It's important to our church by and large. And I want to offer, you can go on our website, go to spwellesley.org, and you can see all the things that we do. But I'd offer you 3 examples tonight of things that we do in our parish that help to lift up the voices of women, and especially women's preaching. The first is, for decades, we have offered a program called Evening for Women. Once a month, all of the women in our parish come together. They gather in the basement of St. John's Church, where Voice of the Faithful was founded. It's a potluck affair. Everybody brings a dish, and we share in fellowship and conversation. But before we get down to the business of figuring out what's going on in everybody's life, we listen to a woman or a speaker present on a topic. We allow them to break open the word. So on things from synodality to Julian of Norwich, to biblical exegesis. It's all happening in that space, and women who come from all walks of life are exploring that together and then sharing a meal and discussing what they've heard. But they're listening to voices. The second is each spring, our parish offers a reconciliation service that is specifically designed for the teenagers in our collaborative. And in that context, we offer a space for women to preach so that our young people can hear the word of God broken open in a different tone and a different timbre than they've ever heard before. I know that it works because last year I got an offer to become a ghostwriter for a retired priest in the Archdiocese after he heard me preach on Zacchaeus. But more than anything, it breaks the word open for our young people, and it allows them to see something that they may have never seen before, because the only place that they may be in that Eucharistic liturgy space. So to hear women's voices in that. And then finally, in liturgical seasons like Lent and Advent, we have the unique opportunity to offer adult faith enrichment programs that break open the word and allows women mostly, to hear their own voices and to claim the good news for themselves. And so this past Advent, I ran a program in the collaborative that was called Beginning Again in Faith, Hope, and Joy. We took the 3 weeks of Advent. Every week that we gathered, we had started with a prayer service. So we had a wonderful song, we had some poetry, we had an excerpt from a preacher from Catholic Women Preach. And then, because I planned the program, I had 10 to 15 minutes to preach to the group. Then we invited all of our participants to break out into small groups and to break open the word with one another. What resonated within them? How was the Spirit stirring? And then to come back to one another and to share that. Just recognize that preaching happens in a pulpit. It also happens around dining room tables. And it happens in people being able to express their faith in a way that we are not, as Catholics, typically trained to do so or comfortable doing so. And I think that is a piece of what Catholic Women Preach offers us and what my ministry in a parish allows me to do. It empowers new voices to speak up, to ask big questions, and not worry about having solid answers. And it allows us to listen to the Spirit in the way that the Spirit builds community in us and among us. And so I've seen the same thing happen in my digital ministry. I'm a writer, but also the podcast. And the podcast has done this wonderful thing. If you've ever listened to Beyond the Habit, you know that the first words you hear out of my mouth are moving beyond everyday assumptions of what it means to be Catholic and live the gospel. That's what we do. And that's how Beyond the Habit serves as a means of preaching. Myself and a co-host, another sister of St. Joseph, do that by engaging in meaningful and deeply personal conversation with our guests. It provides a platform for all of our listeners to enter into conversations that they might feel uncomfortable with, that they might never hear, but that they could sit down to have coffee with us and to hear the word proclaimed among them. From Elizabeth Johnson to Greg Boyle, Joyce Rupp, Shannon K. Evans, and our own Kayla August. We've had them nearly 50 people on. In some ways, Beyond the Habit serves as a pulpit on download. You can listen to it while you're driving to work. You can listen to it while you're out walking the dog. As one of our parishioners said, she listens to it while she's chopping vegetables in the kitchen. And they say, "Oh, is Sister Colleen over?" No, she's just coming out of Siri. As a mode of preaching, the podcast does what all good preaching does. It provokes prayer, self-examination, and it prompts action. The conversations that we have on the podcast call us and our listeners outside of ourselves to encounter the other and to have a real experience, whether that be an experience of consolation, of challenge, or a call to reconsider our own estimation of what the gospel is. The podcast as preaching invites us, myself included, to the risky work of ongoing conversion. It invites us to listen deeply and to know that our voice is valued and valuable, no matter who we are. And I think ultimately it makes space for the Spirit. That's what all of our ministry does. It's what we as a church should do. We make space for people so that they can hear God at work, and sometimes God's voice has our own timbre to it. And so I leave you with the words of that card that hangs right above my desk, that it might inspire us and it might speak to us about what women's preaching really is about, that we might hold on to our realness, trust in our own voice, and believe in the difference it can make. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that so much, Colleen. It is such a joy to be with her on Beyond Habit as well. I highly recommend that you get, if you can, get a spot on there. You do, because it's amazing. I get to talk about my vocation of being a preacher today. And there are moments in our life when vocation is revealed, and we kind of see the hand of God at work. Sometimes it trickles in, and sometimes it's a beaming light. And one of my most vivid moments when it was really confirmed in me was when I was in the birthplace of the church, when I was on a pilgrimage in Israel, and I was at the site of Pentecost. I was traveling with a group of students, and we had the unique opportunity to have Mass in the upper room. And I was geeking out, guys. That is a big deal for me. And just like the apostles got their preaching mission there, I got the chance to preach there. We had this private liturgy, and I was invited as a guest preacher. And I remember stepping up to the ambo and feeling like, oh my God, this is one of those moments you just don't forget. The Spirit was undoubtedly with me the whole time, and I knew God was working in me and in others. And I preached about the fact that when God speaks through us, we get to hear it in different tongues. And different people hear in different ways. And the ways in which we hear, right, God knows and makes sure that we're attentive and that we have someone that speaks in the way that we can listen. And little did I know that at that moment, I was living my own message. Mass is over, and we're all gathering, and one of my students comes up to me, and she is overwhelmed with emotion, and she's like crying. And she goes, Kayla, I've just never seen a woman do that before. And it really meant something to me. I tell this story not to aggrandize my own preaching. I think that was the Spirit at work. I tell it because whenever I say that moment, a woman who is with me goes, I've had that moment. Or I've given that moment. That moment when something awakens in us. A woman is preaching and we go, oh my God, I didn't know God could move that way. And I am changed by it. I have the opportunity to preach a lot. I am very privileged to have that opportunity, and I get to preach at prayer services and conferences and on podcasts and all types of ways. And no matter how many times I preach, I am astounded that I get two questions the most. The first question I get whenever I say, my name is Kayla and I'm a preacher, they say, where do you do that? And the other question is, you're Catholic? Where do you do that? Where do you even find places to preach? And two, you are Catholic, right? You said that. It's not a question of malice or dismissal. There's a genuine question there that comes from living in a church where women preaching is often outside of the imagination of the community. They just can't see it. And it assumes that being a woman and being a Catholic and being a preacher are concepts that just don't go together. And that question, these questions linger between every retreat I speak at, every prayer service, every workshop I give, because I'm reminded that no matter how many times I get up in front of someone and I preach, or a woman in my life preaches, that there will be someone in some place somewhere who never has the opportunity to see it in the church. And that's why I'm grateful to Catholic women preach. I think these questions are important to remember because they don't happen to a clergyman. They don't happen that someone says, where do you get to do that? Or, are you sure you're Catholic? And yet I continue to get up and preach because I really feel it's something I'm called to do and that God has put on my heart to do. And I think the power of women preaching is something that isn't forgotten. It arouses something in men and women alike, and it calls us to something more. And for me, it makes the scripture come alive in new ways. Vision with me. A round young mother expositioning during Advent of the Christ child yet to come as she welcomes the child of her own. The witness of an elderly woman who speaks of Elizabeth's gift from God even in her old age that shows the miracles that God can work even later in life. A teenage girl preaching on the Annunciation as she proclaims how the angel was sent to an unknown teenager in Nazareth to foretell how the world would change through her. A young girl, like Jeremiah, who preaches that she is not too young to speak of the mighty acts of God, and she discovers her own prophetic voice in her community. A woman whose life has known many inner demons, preaching about the woman from whom demons had gone out. And preaching about Mary Magdalene as someone who has known the darkness and felt that her life was entombed, and yet also knows the glory of a God who rolled the stone away and let her see the light. Because she can proclaim that she has seen the Lord. Women's voices are vital to our church, and they are necessary and they are needed, and I really think without a voice of a woman, our church feels soulless. It's missing something essential. For me and my vocation, it's not just important that I preach, but that other people are doing it too. And I work in education to make sure people feel prepared and ready to preach whenever and wherever they can, whether it be at an ambo or at the kitchen table. But as I invite people to preach, I am reminded of my own vocation all the time. And in fact, I have a sweatshirt that I wear. It's a red sweatshirt, and it's got white letters across, and it says, "Becoming the person I once needed." Becoming the person I once needed. It's a reminder to me that as a young Black Catholic girl in the church, I rarely saw faces and bodies that looked like mine proclaiming from platforms, or being even a leader in my group and community in my small suburban town. And that when I get up and preach, I don't just model something, I awaken an imagination of someone who shares maybe my identity, my culture, my background, my gender, that says that their voice matters in this church too. And that their insight is needed. Not just wanted, needed. So when I preach, whenever I get up, I'm preaching for the Kayla that was. And the Kaylas out there still yet to be. Anyone who's still wondering if their voice matters in the church, anyone wondering if God is working through them, that they can witness and say, yeah, me too. And I think that's true for all of us. When you preach, someone who shares your identity, your culture, your background, your gender, your whatever it may be for you, sees themselves and the church in you in a new way. And when we preach, we encourage someone else to stand up and make their voice known. And that's a good thing. Because in those moments, the Spirit's flowing, and God is present, and we're all sent out on mission, just like the day of Pentecost. And we're reminded that the Spirit is not dead, but alive in all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla, for that beautiful, beautiful reflection, that beautiful, beautiful preaching. And thank you so much for this invitation to share with all of you this evening. The Cycle C collection produced by Catholic Women Preach culls together a symphony of theological voices, emphasizing God's abiding presence in our lives. I want to thank all 62 contributors for your meditations on the readings alongside the lived realities of everyday life. You represent diverse backgrounds, and you grappled with challenging topics such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the ecological crisis. 2025 marks 60 years since the closing of the Second Vatican Council, and 1700 years since the Council of Nicaea. And Christians are still grappling with the implications of what it means to confess when baptism, what it means to take seriously what Lumen Gentium says when it says, through baptism we are formed in the likeness of Christ. In the sacramental waters of baptism, we are initiated into new life. I invite you to think about all of the women who came before us, those who we remember in scripture, those whose names we recite liturgically in litanies, those named and unnamed women who comprise our tradition. How might we conceive of these women as our chosen preaching ancestors? And how might we think of ourselves as members of their lineage, called to speak, to share the good news about the God of love? Theologian Mary Catherine Hilkert says that, quote, "The preacher speaks in the name of the community and proclaims the deepest convictions of the community," unquote. In a posture of Sankofa, I would like to retrieve some lessons from women who we might consider as our preaching ancestors. Sankofa, in the Ghanaian Twi language, can be translated in English as to go back and get. It is often signified by the adinkra mark of a bird craning its neck to balance an egg between its beak and back, while the bird's feet remain pointed forward. In this posture of recovery, I will share 3 brief vignettes of women preaching and expressing the contiguity of the divine to enfleshed realities. 1. Miriam, the sister of Moses, experienced enslavement, family separation, intergenerational trauma, foreign oppression, and despotic rule. Miriam empowered her community at the edge of the sea to sing a song of liberation once they emerged from captivity. After the ancient Israelites completed their aquatic crossing through the Sea of Reeds, Miriam is one of the first articulators of their liberation. Exodus 15:20-21 reads, quote, "Then the prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, 'Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea,'" unquote. The community acquired a new freed identity. Miriam leads the crowd, choreographing and lyricizing their liberation. In this embodied act of thanksgiving, Miriam enacts a liturgy and coordinates a collective act of liberative praise. Through her song, Miriam preaches a poetics of freedom, a poetics of life. 2. Servant of God, Sister Thea Bowman was a Franciscan sister of perpetual adoration. Prior to receiving her doctorate from the Catholic University of America, Sister Thea bore the lived experiences of segregation in the Jim Crow South. In her 1989 address to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Sister Thea said, quote, "The work of the ordained minister, of the professional minister, is to enable the people of God to do the work of the church, to feed us sacramentally, to enable us to preach and to teach. And I ain't necessarily talking about preaching in the pulpit. You know as well as I do that some of the best preaching does not go on in the pulpit. But as a Catholic Christian, I have a responsibility to preach and to teach, to worship and to pray, unquote. Sister Thea's understanding of preaching was not restricted to the pulpit, but rather imbued the intrinsic possibilities of the Christian vocation. She situates teaching and preaching as responsibilities belonging to the entire people of God. In that same address, Sister Thea invited the gathered to hold hands and overlap arms, singing the traditional song, "We Shall Overcome." This embodied action alluded to the past civil rights movement while simultaneously propelling the church towards a future possibility. Sister Thea found within Africana aesthetics a grammar for articulating what the church could look like. 3. The late Black Catholic writer Toni Morrison also left us with a vision of what our communities can become when women preach. In her novel Beloved, Baby Suggs Holy gathers those touched by slavery to the clearing. Amidst the thick trees, the gathered are tasked to love their bodies, to honor their flesh. In a society, she says to them that in a society that seeks to dehumanize them, that seeks to ravish their flesh, there is a call to attending to the self, attending to the body. And so she gives this sermon of healing. She says, quote, "Here, in this here place, we flesh that weeps and laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in the grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh, they despise it. They don't love your eyes, they'd just as soon pick 'em out. No more do they love the skin on your back, yonder they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands, those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them, raise them up, and kiss them," unquote. The clearing is a liminal space, straddling what is and what could be. Baby Suggs preaches to those who experienced bondage, those who crossed borders and state lines searching for geographies of freedom, those who were humiliated, mortgaged, brutalized, wounded, and raped. And while she does not deny the challenges of the world, which she describes as yonder, she offers a pedagogy of love. Systematic theologian M. Sean Copeland notes that, quote, "Baby Suggs speaks into new life God's image in Black flesh," unquote. She reminds the gathered of a holistic anthropology that counters the logics of domination that wait beyond the circumference of the clearing. This capacious love enables resistance to a society of violence, patriarchy, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and ecocide. All three women, Miriam, Sister Thea, and Baby Suggs Holy, emerge from contexts of systemic injustice. They proclaimed God's enduring preferential option for the oppressed. These preaching ancestors have left us with lessons about embodiment and community. Preaching ancestors are not restricted to canonical saints or European geographies. Perhaps preaching also emerges in alternative spaces, like meeting at the clearing or gathering at the edge of the sea. May we heed the wisdom of these ancestral women who preached. Thank you.
techno peasant. Fabulous presentations. We are going to take some questions for the panelists or for the two of us. We can address, for example, I can give you an update about where it stands with this question of lay Eucharistic preaching at the Eucharist. Kayla and I participated in an amazing conference on that, and that has possibilities of moving forward in the synodal process. But first, we'd like you to just turn to your neighbors and take, 5 minutes?
Yeah, we'll wrap up around 7.
Okay, just 5 minutes. Here's some possible questions that you can talk among yourselves. Potentially, how has the good news been proclaimed to you by women? What impact has this had on your own faith journey? Are there opportunities in your ministry setting for women to preach? What is working well, and what are some of the growth edges? What hopes do you have for the future of women proclaiming the good news? So just takes about 5 minutes to talk about that, and then we'll take questions and answers.
I hope you've had some great conversations. But we do want to make some space for some larger group conversation. So if you have any questions for either myself or Betty Ann about Catholic Women Preach, about our work, about this volume, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, or maybe even a question for the room, we'd love to hear that. Those of you who are joining us virtually, I think there's a Q&A place where you can go and type those in, and we'll get to some of those as well. And someone is wandering around with microphones? Okay, great.
I can speak, as I mentioned earlier, to a very specific question. Kayla and I were honored to have been among 45 people invited to a 4-day conference at Aquinas Institute in St. Louis last March of 2024, with a very specific purpose in mind. Let's come up with specific language change for a change in canon law that would permit adequately trained lay people, men and women, to offer the homily at the Eucharist. Not after communion, at the Eucharist, at the discretion of the local ordinary. And so 45 were invited, 30 of us came. Very great. Kayla was amazing preaching there too. And we came up with that language. If you know the preparatory document for the 2024 Synod meeting in October, I think it was paragraph 18, it had our language in it, in the Instrumentum Laboris. And I wondered what happened to it in the final document. My understanding is, in addition to the 10 appointed study groups, there is a canonical commission of exploring possible changes in canon law. So, and I don't know if we'll get into that mysterious study group number 5 with utter lack of transparency. But I just want, especially the people in this room, please be proactive on this. You get in touch with the people that you know in Rome. Our friend and colleague Donna Orsuto, who used to run the Lay Center in Rome, she's preached for Catholic Women Preach. She's just been named a consultant to the
She's on the dicastery.
on the dicastery for liturgy. So maybe Donna is our entry point, but we just can't let this drop. It's on us to implement synodality in the U.S. Church and in this next phase of making sure that something happens.
And I'll lift up some good news. It was a couple weeks ago now that Pope Francis named the first woman to be a prefect of a dicastery, and I'm forgetting her name now, so if anyone knows it, but it's a sister who's the prefect of the dicastery for religious life. So that's very good news. That was one of the things that the Constitution rewriting the Vatican Curia allowed for, and we never knew if it ever would actually happen, and it actually happened. So that's some good news there too.
This has been incredible. Thank you all so much. And I was here last year as well, and we were just talking back here, and I want to know, there's so much joy that I feel here, and I did last year. How do you keep that joy? Because the cynicism is so strong out there, and I just find it so fascinating to be here and to feel that from this community and from the service and from the panelists. So that is my question.
Try this one. I would want to distinguish happiness from joy. Right? What's the difference? Happiness is thinking everything is good. Joy is knowing death doesn't have the last word. And I think as a consequence of that, I find a reason for joy as I think about those that will be coming after me and how we create spaces. Those of us that have had the privilege, certainly the four of us here sitting, have had privileges. Joy comes from creating new spaces for those that are 10 years younger than us, 20 years younger than us, in my case, 60 years younger than me. I want to see 10-year-old little girls finding their voice and being encouraged, because the four of us sitting here were 10-year-old girls at some point in time. And there were graces that we received at 10 years old that have just manifested themselves as we have grown older. Several years ago, Betty Ann, I'll tell this story, I was invited to give a talk at Boston College on women in the church. And I thought to myself, well, you know, I have plenty to say. But at that time, Betty Ann's daughter, Maria, what was Maria, 11? 12.
She's now 34, doing a fellowship in gastroenterology at Boston Medical Center. She was 12.
No big deal.
Anyway, that was Maria at 12, and I wanted to hear what she had to say about women in the church. And I talked with Betty Ann, then I invited Maria. It was amazing. I would have sat down and just listened to Maria and said to myself, okay, enough from an old lady. But the thing is I was talking earlier about partnership in preaching. Partnership, for those of us who have any kind of power, need to be creating spaces and places and encouragement and showing up, because we do individuals honor when we show up to listen to them. Amen. And I don't think we can underestimate the power. You all do us honor by being here tonight, and that's a source of joy.
I think, you know, joy is born out of the gift of witness, and being able to witness the Spirit at work in people's lives. And so in this year of hope, you know, this Jubilee of Hope that we're celebrating, the call to be in relationship with one another. In such an age of isolation, and the temptation is so much to despair and to plant seeds in a ground of despair and say, like, nobody's going to take my joy. You can't have it. It's mine, and I'm going to see it in other people. And can I see the light in other people? It doesn't mean everything is great and I'm Pollyannish and it's beautiful. Anybody who works with me will tell you I am not. You know, critical realism, but to say joy brings forth hope, and hope is a virtue that we do not make happen. And so it's there. So can we witness to it in the communities that we belong to, and can we foster it? And even when I feel like this is tough work, to be courageous, to risk vulnerability, to be joyful with people, and to bring that to a community and know that it will multiply, because what we put into community multiplies.
In the early 80s, I was at the Paula Center on Good Friday when a woman gave the homily. And And I was so happy. I can't tell you how happy I was and what a beautiful job she did. Now, fast forward to Mother's Day that year. We were told that the Archdiocese threatened to shut down the Paula Center if a woman ever got up in that pulpit again. Very chilling. I wonder what would happen if someone got up, let's say in St. Thomas, my church, and was my church. What would happen? What would be the response from the powers that be in the Archdiocese? Have we come that far that everyone would clap? And that's where I'm at. I just think women preaching is such a gift, and it's so sad that it doesn't happen in every church on every Sunday. So I'm just wondering what you think the Archdiocese would do. Have we? This is recorded. Have we progressed that far? Or made baby steps even?
I don't live in the Archdiocese of Boston. I did have my fair share of run-ins with the hierarchy when I did live in the Archdiocese of Boston. So I really can't answer that particular question, Irene. But what I can say is that I think we have progressed. Maybe not to the point where the Archbishop is going to be all right with that, or to the point where everyone in the pew is going to clap. But last year's volume, the Year B volume, won first place in liturgy from the Catholic Media Association. And I don't know whether or not that could have happened 10 years ago. If we had released this series 10 years ago, would that have happened? I don't think so. We've been at Catholic Women Preach for 9 years. More women have been at it in their parishes and their communities for decades, as you know. And you just got to keep chipping away. Whether or not we are at that moment, every single person that you can get to clap in that pew matters. And so we just need to keep chipping away at that. Future Church, my organization, has been around for 35 years. And we've been working on elevating Mary Magdalene to her rightful place in the church's memory for 25, 30 of those years. And it wasn't until 2016 that her memorial was raised to a feast day. And what that means is now she gets a proper preface before the Eucharistic prayer. What that means is she has a set of readings. We wanted her to get elevated to a solemnity, but we didn't quite get to the point of a solemnity. But that took 20 years of concerted effort. Catholic Women Preach, like I say, has been at it for 9 years. This past October, we were at the Synod talking about women who are erased from the lectionary. So, Chanelle, Miriam, that reading does not appear in the Easter Vigil. That does not come up in the Easter Vigil. Mary Magdalene, which we read today, that story is not read on Easter Sunday. It comes on Easter Tuesday when all of you are in church, right? Now you're theology students, so you might go to daily mass, but right, you don't hear those stories. Phoebe, who is named a deacon of the church at Kencrea, is never mentioned at church, period. She just isn't in there. And so we were at the Synod, and in the lead up to the Synod, we contacted everyone we could possibly contact, and we got language in the final document that says, I think it's adequate space needs to be given to these women in the lectionary. I mean, it's like this little teeny tiny step, but we got to keep at it. We got to keep at it, because that's the only way we're going to get to the point where the Archbishop of Boston is in the pews listening and gets on his feet and claps.
There's a Brazilian proverb that I'm going to share, which I hope in a way answers the question. And in Portuguese, it goes like this. Água mole, pedra dura, bate até que fura. And the English translation is, the rock is hard, the water is fluid. The water beats against the rock until it breaks through.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn's mother. But I actually was a little bit discouraged because I think one of you women started out saying, if we create this space, will women listen? And as a mother and a million other roles, I think we women, whether we're preaching and fortunate enough to be featured in preaching or just doing our daily preaching, need to respect each other and listen to each other. I mean, in every group that I've been in over many phases of life, everybody has a story and everybody wants to be listened to. And I think we are the teachers and we are the preachers. Why are we not in a group saying, we want to hear women, we want to hear them now, and we want to be included? And if so, if not, maybe we need to teach our sons and daughters to go somewhere else to have their spirituality recognized. And there is this just radical part of me that keeps wanting to say that. Why are we not telling them, hey, this isn't right. This needs to be expanded. We could all stand up and go, and who would be teaching them? Nobody. So I know we didn't really address this, and it's not really the place, but I so appreciate future churches' ability to keep the faith and try to change the church by baby steps. But every once in a while you do say, oh, it's such a little fissure created in that rock, such a little tiny one. We're ready for maybe more. And so, but I mean, this is a great start. But, do you have any further thoughts on, I love the future church is radically changing everything very respectfully. And I think that is really the only way to do it, or I would have said, okay, let's all march out, But I just think, the Spirit needs to come and help us find a little bit, another way to maybe get a little bit of a bigger step, like maybe one giant step, and then keep on with our baby steps.
Oh, repeat the question, so it'd be helpful. Well, I think it's the question of, do you stay or do you go? And the piece of, why can't the church just change? Like, why can't something happen? It's a great question. If I had an answer, I'd make a lot of money and I'd save religious life and the church would be, completely reconciled. It'd be wonderful. But I think the point you started with about, if women hear other women preaching, can we lift up each other's voices? And so that grassroots effort of how are we building one another up? That classic line of, see how they love one another. And as a community, as a church, we're not great at loving one another. We're not great at lifting up one another's gifts. And so how are we doing that? And to your point over here, the new Archbishop, how can we, without sowing seeds of division, how can we invite creativity? How can we invite reconciliation? How can we invite, because that, while it seems very small, is a monumental thing. And to hear everyone's voices is a monumental thing in our church. And so how to hold the both end, how to hold the hierarchy, how to also hold, the church small c with all, here comes everybody. So that's not really an answer to your question, I'm sorry. But I think there is a piece about how do we treat each other with love and compassion, and how does that then breed creativity to change the church from within, without, for those who might not be ready to say, I'm leaving the whole thing behind.
And I just wanted to add, will women listen to each other? I think we often get in the space of saying when women speak or women listening, and I just want to make sure we always say to ourselves, is the church listening? Because we can get in this this kind of way of saying like, well, when the woman's speaking, she's speaking for the women. We never say that when the man is speaking. And I want to make sure that we're speaking because the whole church is edified by the words of this person and God moving through them. I had this beautiful moment of thinking about how we teach, and we teach implicitly and explicitly in all moments. So I think part of it is us asking ourselves how we want to explicitly teach to make sure we all listen, but also implicitly, I would ask us when a woman is talking. Thank you. Someone's trying to quiet me. They're like, I didn't listen at that board meeting. Shh. At a board meeting, are we listening? When a 10-year-old comes up to us and says, I have a story to tell you, are we going, and watching our show, or we're going, I can't wait to hear it? I think all of those moments teach us and communicate as a community who is worth listening to, and that what they're saying matters and contributes. And so I think it's in small moments. But I had this opportunity to, one of my favorite opportunities in school, to go to a second grade classroom and teach them how to preach. And so fun. It was adorable. And they had we made a little mini pulpit. I had them have a 4-word sermon. Guys, sermons about all kinds of things to, if God is real, my mom will take me to Paris. Okay. Sure. And also God is asking us to make sure we clean the environment so that we have a good world for people who come after us. I think in that moment, it was a teaching about ecclesiology because I had them all write and get up and say their 4-sentence sermon. And I remember teaching them, no matter who is up here, we are listening. And it's not just important for you to speak, but when this person is speaking, we listen because the Holy Spirit's working through them and you. And if we don't listen, we'll miss it. We will miss it. And so it was them just being like, oh, okay. And every person, man and woman, who got up and spoke, they were just listening and listening for what God was saying. And I thought, what a great lesson to teach them as second graders that everyone in the community is contributing to the body of Christ. So I ask us that in the moments that we intentionally and unintentionally teach from young to old, how are we teaching who we should listen to? Because even at a pulpit, that is one moment. And we learn much before that whether or not we should be tuning in or not.
I just want to add quickly before we move on from this point, because Sister Meg, when you asked that question, do women want to listen to women? I thought it was a very important. I think that when we look in Scripture, we see these incredible examples like Mary having this wonderful exchange with Elizabeth, and it's generative, and they're both talking about how God has touched them. But then we also see really challenging examples like Sarah and Hagar, where Hagar has encountered and seen God, and Sarah casts her out, that there's still a power dynamic at play even among these two women. And so I heard in your question this alternative question of what does solidarity demand? What does it mean for us to really be with each other and belong to each other?
I'd like to follow up on that, just as a comment. I was thinking about a dozen years ago, West Coast, onto a mission church. Wonderful experience. Gospel was the Good Samaritan, really lovely, until the priest got up to the pulpit. He preached on abortion and women who've had abortion. It was absolutely awful. I came out of the church and I just stood waiting for the priest to come up. But this woman went right up to him and said, "Do you know what harm you just did?" And she excoriated him for about 15 minutes. I stood with her for the 15 minutes so that she kept speaking. I do think that we need, as we're talking about women preaching, about women's voices. Like for me, I know in the church that I preside at on Sunday, that it's women who invariably are in the majority who come and give me an assessment of what I may have said. I do think that we should not unhook women's voices from women preaching. I think we need to realize that women are preaching in a variety of different places, as that woman did to that priest who so alienated the community from the gospel. So I just want to say something very positively, that I think that when women recognize, that they need to speak up, they do.
Thank you, Jim. For those of you who are present here, please consider purchasing the Year C book to nourish and inspire you throughout the liturgical year. We've just begun. It features a wonderful foreword by our friend, Dominican Sister of Peace, Mary Catherine Hilkert, and cover art by the phenomenally gifted Laura James. For those of you who are joining us online, I believe the link is going to be shared with you, where you can purchase the book directly from Orbis. All proceeds from the book sales do go back into production of the website, the videos, and the podcasts. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Cara. Thank you, James. Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Sister Anna. Thank you, Colleen and Kayla and Meg and Chanelle. Did I forget anyone? Thank you. Thanks to us. Thank you all for being here. Have a good night. Get home safe.